Okay. Good morning, everybody. We are so glad you could join us this morning. Our hope is that we will all go away from this forum with more ideas about how to move through the holiday season and beyond in ways that will help us contribute to a more sustainable earth, gently encouraging ourselves to lessen our burden on the environment. Doing so will be a significant contribution to lessening the climate change by reducing such a deep need to produce and transport and then dispose of excessive products. Thank you for participating today. We have been able to obtain the benefits of 3 experienced participants who've been working on environmental sustainability for some time. Our speakers today are the Town of Bethlehem Recycling Coordinator, Dan Lilkes, Rain. And Dan, can you raise your hand? Where are you? Okay. Tracy Frisch, an entomologist and longtime activist for environmental sustainability. Tracy, raise your hand, please. And Sonny Van Piedman, Albany Recycling Coordinator. And Sonny, maybe you could tell us just a little bit about yourself, since I didn't get that information, but maybe you could help us with that when you speak.
Sure.
Each of the speakers will take about 10 minutes to tell us all share some of their great wisdom with us, which I'm sure they could go on more than 10 minutes, but we're asking to limit it to 10 minutes. And so at the end of that half hour or so, after they have spoken, we will have questions and answers. So you can put your questions in the chat if you're online, or save your questions. We'll give you an opportunity in Channing to, or in wherever, I'm sorry, where you're not in Channing, in the church, to ask your questions. So let's do the speakers in this order. Let's have Dan, and then Tracy, and then Sonny. And I'll kind of raise my hand and do something like this at the end of 10 minutes. So would you like to go ahead, Dan?
Oh,
Sure. Good morning. Thank you for inviting me to be part of discuss one of my favorite topics: recycling and reuse and waste reduction and all that good stuff. So if I'm able to, I'm going to share my screen at this point. I think I need to be allowed to do that by the host.
Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. I forgot to read your biography.
it's all right.
Okay. You each of you tell us a little bit about you, please, if you could.
Sure. So I'm Dan Lucas Rain. I'm the recycling coordinator for the town of Bethlehem. I've been in that position for 12 years now. And I'm also the vice president for NYSAR3, the New York State Association for Reduction, Reuse, and Recycling. And longtime community member and father of 3, and happy to be here with everyone. So if I'm able to share my screen. Oh, here we go. Thank you. I will do that now. Now I need to go back to my.
Yay.
Excuse me just a second here. Can you still see my slideshow, or are you seeing other things?
We see your slideshow.
Great.
Yeah, we can see it, Dan. It looks good. Thanks.
All right. All right. So just going to share a few slides. Here's our zero waste hierarchy to put everything in perspective. I'm going to be talking mostly about recycling and composting, but as you can see, that's kind of in the middle of the hierarchy. Rethink or redesign, and a lot of times people say refuse, not refuse, spelled the same, but refuse can be at the top. In other words, refuse to purchase or acquire stuff that we don't really need in the first place. And then reduce, that's very similar to refusing. That's how you help reduce, is by refusing things. You're looking for products with less packaging when you have a choice. Buy bulk at the co-op. And then reuse is a big part of reduction as well, because if you're reusing your stainless steel water bottle or your ball jar for over and over again for different things, you're not going to acquire the plastics or the other materials in the packaging largely that's going to need to then be recycled, etc. So I want to give a brief history of recycling. Starting in ancient times, people have recycled, apparently perhaps as long ago as 500 BC or earlier. There was paper recycling happening. A couple of notable events in the United States history. 1776, he pulled down a statue of King George III in making munitions. Paper was also recycled at the same time. Into the 18th and 19th centuries, traveling peddlers were recycling a large variety of materials. A couple examples are rags made into paper and leftover bones that could be made into fertilizer. The rag man that came around was well into the 20th century as well. A lot of these things never really stopped in all places in the world. 1919 in Chicago, for example, there were more than 1,800 individual scrap materials dealers. And in the 30s and 40s, with the Great Depression and World War II, there was a lot of recycling by necessity, frugality, just scarcity of materials, as well as just that was still part of our cultural value that we reused and recycled every little scrap of everything that we could. My father was born in 1935. I remember him telling me about growing up in that era and how they would have a woman's stocking, I believe, to hold the soap. And you get your little bits of the bar of soap that were left. You'd combine them all in the stocking. You'd have more soap than, wouldn't go down, the little bits wouldn't go down the drain, and every little piece of metal. And like I said, the rag dealers that were making paper. So it's more of a 20th century and 21st century idea that the stuff that we acquire is to be thrown out rather than reused or recycled. The whole consumer culture that says new products are better than old, why repair them or reuse them in some way when we can just landfill them. Speaking of landfills, the first landfill in the US was Fresh Kills, opened in 1947 on Staten Island. And that was the first of many symbols of our growing mountains of waste in our society. 60s through the 80s, we have the birth of the modern environmental movement, but also, unfortunately, a shift where recycling stopped being something consumers used to get the most out of the materials. And instead, we have to deal with the massive amounts of waste produced during the second half of the 20th century and now into the 21st century. Here's an ad from the early 70s for promoting recycling, showing all the stuff that we were already acquiring, producing at that point. There was a corporate sponsored shift in responsibility at this time for recycling from the companies themselves to the consumers, especially with the can and bottle industry being at the kind of the heart of that. And you may remember Keep America Beautiful ad campaigns that started in the 60s and 70s, especially like this one here with a crying Indian with the slogan, "People start pollution, people can stop it." It said it's shifting the responsibility to the consumer for stuff that's made by the manufacturers. And then we've got some history of 71 was Oregon was the first state to pass a beverage container deposit law. 1980, Woodbury, New Jersey became the first city with a curbside recycling program. And here, many of you may remember, I remember this as a kid, 1987, we had this Mobro 4000 garbage barge, which started in Islip, New York, with 3,168 tons of trash from Long Island and perhaps New York City as well, Manhattan as well. They were headed for New Jersey, but got rejected from New Jersey and North Carolina and all throughout the world because of the rumored contamination of the garbage with medical waste, and it's just in general, nobody wanted Islip's garbage, New York's garbage, and eventually, many months later, returned to New York, and it was eventually landfilled. And that 400 tons of ash that was left over was landfilled in Islip. I'm sorry, it was incinerated, and the 400 tons of ash was landfilled in Islip. Here you have Greenpeace's banner, "Next time, try recycling." And this was really a pivotal event in New York State, but as around the country as well. In late 80s, 1990s, early 90s is when we have our current New York State and other local municipal recycling laws, which continue to this day. So I'm going to stop sharing at this point and continue talking about some other things. So that's a brief history of recycling in the United States. I also wanted to talk about next, the process of recycling. A lot of times it can be confusing, and it's perfectly understandable because it's complicated and it's sort of ever changing. I've had the opportunity to tour both of our single stream recycling MRFs, we call them, material recovery facilities that are in the region. One is run by Waste Connections, County Waste. You might know them as County Waste. It's called Sierra Processing. It's at the Port of Albany. It's been in operation in its present form since 2010. And then the other one is run by Twin Bridges Waste and Recycling up in Clifton Park. That was just built about a year ago. So those are the two single stream MRFs that recycling sorting facilities that operate. Now, I have had the good fortune of getting to tour both of those over the years, starting in 2010 and several times since, and then most recently the new Twin Bridges. So kind of got a pretty good idea about what's really happening in the at these facilities.
Dan,
So
10 minutes is up. Can you wind up? Sorry.
okay, that was quick. Basically, I wanted to mention a couple of common contaminants, tanglers, especially anything from plastic bags to garden hoses and things that are shaped like that. Textiles, clothing, and other textiles are very recyclable, but reusable and recyclable, but not to be put in your curbside bin. I also wanted to dispel a couple of myths about recycling. First of all, it is important not to contaminate your recycling, and I think everybody has heard that message. That means only recycle that which is acceptable by your municipal program. And unfortunately, in New York State, that means if you live in the city of Albany, it's going to be different slightly, at least from the town of Bethlehem, although we were pretty similar. And Sonny can speak to the city of Albany's, and I can answer questions about the town of Bethlehem's, and our websites have that information. If you live elsewhere, it's going to be different, even in New York State. So know your programs. Ask your recycling coordinators. You have two of us here today. If you have any questions, and only ever put in things that are accepted. However, I want to dispel the myth that if you accidentally put in a couple of things that are not accepted for recycling, that's going to contaminate your entire recycling bin, cart or bin, and therefore potentially contaminate the whole load on the truck. Just not how it works. Most of the recycling curbside nowadays is picked up by mechanical arms on trucks. The cart gets dumped into the truck loose. Never bag your recycling, never ever. And then it's going to get sorted out at the MRF by a combination of humans and a lot of pretty sophisticated technology. Now, it's true that if everybody puts in a quarter or 30% of their cart is contaminated stuff, then it's going to kind of destroy the whole system. But if you accidentally put in a couple of things, it's not going to ruin the whole load. Just be really careful about that. Another couple of myths that I wanted to quickly talk about, and then I'll let Tracy go. And I know Tracy's going to be speaking about plastics. I wanted to talk briefly about compostable plastics. Compostable plastics, for the most part, are not compostable unless you have them at a large facility that composting facility that gets really hot and over an extended period of time. So if you have a clear cup from Starbucks or something that says compostable, it might be compostable, but only at one of these industrial or municipal large facilities, like the Town of Bethlehem's facility, although we do not accept plastics because of the potential contamination and the extra time it takes and potential PFAS contamination. Don't try to put it in your backyard composting bin. Same thing with a compostable cutlery. It's just not going to break down. Only compost it if you know it's going to a facility that accepts it and that's a large composting facility. The other thing is about plastics. There's been a lot of confusion and even misinformation about recycling plastics. Well, it's true that plastic bottles and jugs number 1 and 2 are the most valuable consistently. There are a lot of other plastics that are actually able to be recovered and are currently being recovered. Dairy tubs, number 5, for example, and lids. Bulky rigid plastics, things that are often number 7 or don't even have a number on them. Large items like milk crates and Rubbermaid containers and that sort of thing. There are strong markets for those plastics. I'm not suggesting in any way that we should just try to recycle our way out of the plastics crisis, because it's not possible. We need to focus on reduction, reuse, holding the manufacturers accountable, and stopping the production of these single-use plastic items. Because a lot of times when plastics are able to be recycled, they are downcycled rather than recycled. Downcycled meaning they are recycled not into the same type of plastic bottle or whatever that they started out as, but instead downcycled into something that can then not be recycled after that. For example,
Dan, we need to move on so we be sure we can answer questions. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
I'm
We
almost
know you got
finished.
a lot more knowledge on this than you have time to share.
Almost finished, Carol. So last sentence here. So just know that there's a little bit more subtlety to the actual situation of plastic recycling than you hear at the polar extreme, that only one in plastic 1 or 2, or the other extreme is, everything can be recycled and is being recycled. The actual situation is somewhere in the middle, but focus on the other parts of the R's and the hierarchy first and foremost, and I'll wait for questions on recycling later in the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, Tracy. Whoop, you need to unmute, Tracy.
About that. Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me. I live in Washington County. Was a longtime resident in Albany, but I've been living in Washington County for about 15 years. And for the last couple of years, I've been active with Zero Waste Warren County, which is the county that includes Glens Falls and Lake George. I first got involved in the issue of recycling as a graduate student in 1988 at Cornell, when in 3 months I organized a group and we got Cornell to institutionalize recycling. So that was my biggest success. It was very exciting. I also was the founder of the New York Coalition for Alternatives to Pesticides and the Regional Farm and Food Project, both which were based in the Capital Region. So today, I usually work on zero waste policy, but today I'm going to talk about what we can do to reduce both our carbon and our waste footprints. The best thing that we can do is to acquire less stuff in the first place. Therefore, my talk is not going to focus on recycling. Did you know that for every pound of manufactured stuff that you throw away, the production process typically generates far more waste? The ratio that's been cited is 93 pounds of industrial waste for every 3 pounds of consumer garbage. I couldn't substantiate that figure. I only managed to discover that the quantity of waste from mining and manufacturing are not tracked very well. But it is clear that the industrial production that is the basis for most consumer products is responsible for much of the destruction of the natural world, as well as for air, water, and other forms of pollution. You can think about air pollution as landfills in the sky, since the polluting emissions released into the air are a form of waste. You can also you need to consider the hazardous waste that result from industrial production. And these toxic chemicals may come back to haunt us by being trucked, for example, to Norlite in Cohoes, where they're burned, or they may end up in another community's airshed or contaminating drinking water. To recap, raw materials must be mined or otherwise extracted from the earth, trees cut down, and crops grown and harvested. Mineral ore needs to be processed to separate out the minerals, and petroleum needs to be refined. The final assembly process in a factory is just the finale of a long chain of events, which often take place in other countries or other parts of the US where environmental and labor standards are low. Plastic is a great example of the oversized footprint of industrial production. Last month, Beyond Plastics, which is Judith Enck's group, released a report entitled The New Coal, Plastics and Climate Change. And this report reveals that the plastic industry releases as much greenhouse gases as 116 average-sized coal-fired power plants. And now the plastic industry is expanding. What else can natural gas companies do with a glut of fracked gas? And so these carbon emissions are growing rapidly. As many of you probably know, plastic production is also a very dirty industry and a big environmental justice issue. Most of these plastics facilities are located in low-income communities, often people of color communities, where they're associated with high cancer rates and other serious health problems. So what I'd like you to do as a result of my little presentation today is, when you see plastic products on a store shelf, I'd like you to have a visceral reaction. I'd like you to imagine protesters with signs that say, "Don't poison our children." So if there's another option or product you're considering that's not essential, don't buy things made with plastic. They're not going to be recycled anyway. And you're going to be doing all the damages. So much of the damage occurs way before disposal. So let's take white vinyl picket fences. These have been a pet peeve of mine. According to Greenpeace, polyvinyl chloride or PVC is the most environmentally damaging plastic. The life cycle results in the release of toxic chlorine-based chemicals such as dioxin, which build up in the water, air, and food chain. And I also think about plastic mailboxes. Why would you buy a plastic mailbox which will last longer than you will when a metal mailbox can be recycled? And I'm not trying to shame or guilt trip anyone. I just think we need to pay a little bit more attention. The American religion of consumerism has far worse impacts on the environment than the comparatively small, though of course excessive, amount of garbage each of us produces. but the stuff we personally throw away is just what's visible to us. While we should, of course, do everything we can to reduce the amount of garbage by recycling and composting and refusing and sharing and donated, it is just the tip of the iceberg. So I have collected some statistics about our excesses. Most of these come from the website Becoming Minimalist. The average American home contains 300,000 items. 1 out of every 10 Americans rents off-site storage space. 1/4 of Americans with a 2-car garage don't have room to park their cars in them. Another 32% only have room for 1 vehicle. In 2021, our discarded electronics will weigh more than the Great Wall of China, which is the heaviest man-made object on the planet. The average American throws away 65 pounds of clothing a year. And now some things about the fashion industry. A quote from the UK website carbonliteracy.com. The fashion industry is responsible for 10% of all carbon emissions, 1.2 billion tons, more than air travel and actually more than plastics. Between 2000 and 2015, clothing production doubled. 1/3 of young women believe that a garment is old after it's worn once or twice. And in the UK, 300,000 tons of clothes are landfilled each year. If trends continue, studies predict that the fashion industry's share of carbon emissions could reach 25% by 2050. And now just some general statistics. 12% of the global 12% of the global population, the people who live in North America and Western Europe, account for 60% of consumer spending in the world. The 1/3 of the global population that lives in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia only accounts for 3.2%. That's from World Watch. And this is probably the most disturbing. Americans spend $1.2 trillion annually on non-essential goods, from the Wall Street Journal. Higher household income is, of course, associated with a larger carbon footprint. How many of you feel a need to declutter your homes or have a friend or a relative who's struggling with too much stuff? Well, in the gift-giving season between Thanksgiving and New Year's, Americans make 25% more waste. So what can we each do? The very first thing is think before you buy, and maybe stay away from super convenient online shopping sites. Before you buy, ask yourself several questions. Do I really need this? Am I sure I want it? Why am I considering buying it? Can I find a similar product used? If this product will replace something I already own, what should I do with the thing it will replace? Can I give it to someone who could use it, sell it, recycle it, repair it, donate it, or do I have to trash it? And what can I find out about the impacts of manufacturing this product before I make my decision? If you're buying a gift, consider if buying your friend or relative more stuff is meaningful or even loving. Why not give a handmade or a homemade gift, a cultural experience, an outing, a meal, an adventure, artwork? How might you and your family change your holiday traditions? What do our shopping habits say about our values? Faith groups talk about care for creation. Can we be good consumers while caring for creation? As a teenager in the 1970s, I read the book Diet for a Small Planet. I learned to eat lower on the food chain, more plant foods and fewer animal products. Today, I'm a conscious eater, but not a vegan or vegetarian. I'm suggesting an analogous change in our buying habits. We cannot solve the problem of consumption, carbon emissions, air and water pollution, and waste generation simply by recycling our food and beverage containers and our paper and cardboard boxes. So put your consumer purchases on a diet. Buy less, share more, find value outside the shopping cart. Small things you can do besides avoiding as much plastic as you can and putting your consumption on a diet. Stay away from single-serving packaging. And this comes in everything from pet food to snacks. You don't need it. A little You can sacrifice a little convenience. Buy in bulk wherever possible. And Dan mentioned Honest Weight Food Co-op, which is reputed to have the largest bulk section in the entire Northeast. When you order takeout from a restaurant, ask the restaurant to put your order on a plate and then bring your own reusable container and fill it yourself. A health note, never put hot food in a plastic container because heat can cause your food to absorb endocrine disrupting chemicals in the plastic, such as phthalates, which make plastic flexible and have a negative effect on sperm counts and testosterone. Compost your food or yard waste if you can, but keep, take off those PLU stickers and make sure there's no plastic in. And if you can't compost yourself, then hire a service. There are services now in the Capital District. And to the extent that you can afford to buy good quality durable products rather than cheaper ones that are not made to last, do so. And buy gently used stuff as much as you can and donate as much as you can when things can be reused. So I'd like to end with a couple of policy suggestions because that's where my real interests lie. The Capital District needs to get into deconstruction. The waste from a renovation project or the demolition of a home dwarfs the ton or half ton of waste that the average American throws away in a given year. If we're serious about recycling, let's start recycling our buildings. Cities like Portland, Oregon, and San Antonio, Texas have laws and programs in place to encourage or require deconstruction in place of demolition. Deconstruction involves the disassembly of a building so that materials and fixtures can be recycled or reused. There's a market for used building materials, and reuse saves trees and other resources. In Albany, you have the historic Albany's Architectural Parts Warehouse, but that's just the beginning of what can be done. And deconstruction is skilled work. It also has a special relevance to Albany because the biggest construction and demolition landfill in the state is across the river in Rensselaer next to the K-12 school. And this dump, as many of you know, is a huge quality of life issue in Rensselaer. The other suggestion I have is to expand recycling. There are many materials that can and should be recycling besides the few that get picked up curbside. Let's develop resource recovery parks where hard to recycle materials are accepted. Examples of such materials include electronics, bubble wrap, plate glass, books, toilets, sinks, textiles, mattresses, and paints. In Boulder, Colorado established the country's first Center for Hard to Recycle Materials in 2001. It's called CHARM. So you can easily find this online. Someone from our Zero Waste Group in Warren County has relatives in Boulder and is going to give us a virtual tour of CHARM when she's there visiting. And we'll record it. I'll send the link to Carol so that people can access that. So thank you very much. I'd be happy. I had some slides I didn't show, but be happy to talk further with anyone who's interested. Carol, you're muted. Carol, you're muted.
Oh, you're muted.
Oh, whoops. Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Tracy. That was great. Okay, Sonny, are you ready to go?
Yeah, I'll keep it short too.
Thanks.
So my name is Sonny Von Tiedemann. I've been the recycling specialist for the city of Albany since 2019.
Sorry about that.
Sorry?
Sorry. Yeah, my technical mistake. Here, go ahead.
I don't have as much experience in the field as Tracy and Dan, but I agree with everything that they said. In the city of Albany, I think historically we've tried to recycle our way out of the issue instead of focusing on refusing single-use plastics and encouraging reuse. But I think, thankfully, the mindset is starting to change in the city. I'm not going to take any credit for it, but I think the mindset is changing nationwide and in the world. I'm encouraged to see that there's a lot of legislation that's currently, being reviewed. And I'll put a link in the chat to a website that I found that kind of tracks all the various recycling legislation that's out there right now. And a lot of it has to deal with big investments in reuse, EPR laws, which are extended product responsibility. And that's putting the pressure on the companies and manufacturers that make these products and not putting it on the people, because, you know, we have enough on our plates. And I think the ones that are creating these products should be the ones who are responsible for their collection and recycling. And I completely agree with moving away from plastic, period. It's a difficult political position to take. I think that's one of the things that I learned first when I, started this job. Is in my personal life, I'm a super recycler. I try to buy in bulk. I try to live by example, but I think recycling has become politicized in some ways. To give you an example, for a long time, the recycling industry, whether you want to blame it on companies like Waste Connections or whoever, they were accepting any materials they could get their hands on because they could just send it off to China, and China would take anything. And that changed, I guess it was 2016, when China decided that they weren't going to take our recyclables anymore, mainly because there were serious issues with contamination. And we still face those same issues now that we're responsible for our own recycling. But I think up until that point, it was okay to put anything in your bin. But to be completely honest with you, there are many plastics that are in some ways just a waste. It's a waste of time putting it in your recycling bin because there's no market for it. I think Dan had said that, there are some plastics that have a robust market, and that's true. And then there are other ones that are still in use widely that just don't have a market. And honestly, we should phase them out. And what I'm hoping to see with some of the legislation coming down is that we create a universal recycling program nationwide, where there's only a finite amount of plastics that can be used, if at all, if we need to. I personally would like to see plastics just be taken out of consumer product packaging, period. It's a difficult thing to do, but there are companies out there now that are working on reducing the size of their packaging, reducing the amount of plastic that goes in there. I think in a lot of ways, we're starting to realize that we don't need these plastics. There are alternatives that are a lot more recyclable, a lot better for us, don't leach chemicals. And I think that's the direction we need to go in. From the City of Albany perspective and the programs that we run, a lot of programs that are offered in cities across the nation. We do a household hazardous collection events up at the City of Albany landfill. We have electronics recycling shed down at DGS that people can drop off their electronics any day during the week for free. As you know, we have curbside collection of recyclables. Our program is single stream, but I have a feeling that, and don't quote me on this, but I have a feeling that eventually we're going to have to move away from single stream for some of the issues that Dan brought up about contamination and just otherwise. It just doesn't, it's not a solution for our current problem. I think it was a solution that was created back when there wasn't a collective consciousness about the effects that, products and packaging and plastics have on our environment and on our health. But I think going forward, we're going to all need to take a more European approach and be a little bit more responsible for, separation in the household. The difficult thing about that is that, as many of you I'm sure are aware, people have a lot more things on their mind right now. The economy, COVID-19, et cetera, the list goes on and on. Unfortunately, recycling kind of takes a back burner, but I think that it's the responsibility of governments, me, Dan, to partner with people like Tracy or Radix in Albany, Tivoli, people who are out there doing the environmental work, to partner with cities and governments and to create programs that make sense for the average resident, to make things easier on them. And I think that was kind of part of the reason why our City of Albany composting program took off, which we introduced May of last year. It was funded by a DEC grant that Tracy Lieberman, I'm sure many of you probably know her. She helped write it. So thanks to her, it happened. And yeah, we created a backyard composting program. City of Albany residents can sign up. They get a backyard composting bin. They get access to our a separate pile of wood chips, which we've tried to screen as best as we can, because some of the wood chips that we create from the yard waste facility do have a lot of plastics contamination. So we've kind of created a separate wood chip pile. And they get access to a whole bunch of information. And they can contact the Department of General Services if they have issues with, their backyard composting bin. And we've tried to kind of create a program that is inclusive, and also we're always there. We're always there if there are issues that come up. I think sometimes with recycling, when you get to the bin, you don't know what to throw in. I saw there was a question about, metal pieces. Well, in the city of Albany, we don't collect small metal scraps in the recycling bins. You can go to a scrapyard, but to give you an example, a separate example, in New York City, you can put all kinds of stuff. You can put pots and pans, satellite dishes, nuts and bolts, irons, faucets, even car parts. And I think, that's probably one of the biggest issues with recycling, is that there isn't a universal nationwide program. But I would like to see some of these other items, such as the ones I just described, be accepted, because if they can be accepted in New York City, the MRF down there, the equipment is still the same. They should be accepted anywhere. So I personally am going to hopefully push Sierra Processing to accept some more things, some things that make more sense, metal scraps and stuff like that. If they have a machine that can extract aluminum cans, it should work the same for metal scraps. So I actually work pretty closely with the guys down at the MRF. And they've been good about helping me figure out what products they take and what they don't. For instance, recently, over Thanksgiving, I noticed that on the DEC website, they said pie tins weren't acceptable. But then I called down to the materials recovery facility and I asked them, if you get a pre-baked pie, sometimes it comes with the tin on the bottom. And they said, yeah, we accept those. So there's a little bit of confusion in the information, and I would double down on what Dan said. Check with your local municipality on what can and cannot be accepted. Because yeah, it is difficult, but hopefully some of the legislation that's coming down the pike will help clarify some of those questions and streamline what can and cannot go in the bin. I guess to conclude, I would agree again with what Tracy said: buy less, try to reuse as much as you can. There's plenty of resources all over the internet. It is kind of a complex world trying to figure these things out, but there are websites out there that can give you ideas on how to reuse things that you have in your household. Unfortunately, there's not an honest weight in every single city in the country. I wish that there was, but if you're living in the city of Albany, I would suggest buying in bulk. That's what I do. I go to Honest Weight and I have my own containers for everything, and that's what I use. And they're all glass containers, I'm not saying it's easy, it is. It's difficult to do. It is difficult to lead a zero waste lifestyle, but I try to just think about, my kids and their future, and that's my motivation. I think we should all try to leave, this planet, our environment, our communities in better shape than when we got them. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Sonny. Thank you all for sharing such great wisdom. And I just want to add that you made some of the suggestions from our three speakers may make you feel like an eccentric or a weird person, but sometimes you have to just ignore people's reaction to those, because it's a minority and it's unconventional, and don't be afraid to do it. We had some great questions. Let's take 2 or 3 of them from the chat, and then we'll go see if there's any in the audience that's live in the church. Can somebody ask Dan if you can recycle stainless steel, such as hardened machine parts, like mixed steel and plastic items? Also.
Yeah, I answered that in the chat, but just to follow up, and Sonny mentioned this among other awesome information. Good job, Sunny and Tracy, on your presentations. They were both great. But those kinds of, there are a lot of materials that are recyclable in our area, but not in the curbside bin. So I want to make the distinction between drop-off programs where you have to take it somewhere. And hopefully, like Sunny said, maybe we'll have the New York City models where someday in this area you can put out a larger variety of things. But it's mostly your food and beverage containers, your packaging that's accepted in curbside bin, things like plastic bags or other film plastic, e-waste, your electronic items, scrap metal. There are a lot of things that are recyclable, but only if you drop them off. The rechargeable batteries I answered in the chat. And so make sure that you're aware of where to take them. Scrap metal yards in Albany, some of our communities, Town of Bethlehem, Guilderland, others have a transfer station where you can drop certain items off, that sort of thing. But just make sure that you make the distinction between, yes, this is recyclable, but not necessarily in your curbside bin. There was another question that just popped up about New York State food scraps recycling law and how it will affect our region. I'd like to answer that too, if that's okay.
Yeah.
It's already having an effect. The Town of Bethlehem's compost facility is the only municipal facility that accepts food scraps from these large producers. The law, briefly, is January 1st. Large producers, so big grocery store chains, large restaurants, colleges and university cafeterias, things like that, that produce on average more than 2 tons a week of food scraps, have to donate excess food that's edible, and anything that's not edible needs to be recycled either at a compost facility or an anaerobic digester that then composts the digestate part of the solids that are left over from the anaerobic digester. So far, to my knowledge, in the capital region, the Town of Bethlehem, and there's a private facility in Claverack, are the only two in the region listed on the website as being able to accept food scraps. But we are still growing our program. And as I mentioned, we also don't accept plastics. So while we are growing our program partly in response to this new law, and the DEC gave us a matching grant for equipment to do our aerated static pile method and have a bunch of equipment, it's going to be a slow process until we're able to accept even a significant portion of the overall food scraps from the area. So there are other facilities that are going to be constructed, that are going to be popping up in the area. But just at a consumer level, it really raises the awareness for everybody about composting, whether it's backyard composting or programs like the City of Albany's new pilot program where you're dropping it off at one of their locations. Tracy had mentioned there are services for picking up food scraps for those who don't want to or don't have the ability or the space, etc., to compost in their own backyard. Food Scraps 360 is the main one for residential, as well as those that are in the right region. The Radix Center, I believe, does pick up food scraps as well, the right region of Albany. So look into those services if you're in the category of wanting to compost, but not in your own backyard.
Could you three, Dan and Sonny and Tracy, if there's a phone number that you can provide for people in the chat that they could call if they have questions? We're never going to be able to answer all the questions here. So if you are willing to provide a phone number, that would be great, or an email or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to let everybody know, I am recording the chat. So I will have that in the Green Sanctuary Committee will publish that.
You're echoing, Chuck.
Yeah, we're fixing that, right? Okay, I think we fixed. Can you see that? Yeah, anyway, what I was saying was we are recording in the chat, and I will be publishing the relevant information from that in our newsletter as well. So not to worry if something shows up in the chat and you don't get a chance to write it down.
Okay. There's fluorescent bulbs. And rechargeable batteries.
That was already answered in the chat. Do we want to take questions that weren't answered in the
Well,
chat?
there are some people, yeah, okay, but there are people in the congregation that are also listening.
Oh, okay.
So, okay, let's go to the congregation. Is there anyone there live in the community hall? I don't see that, so maybe there isn't. Is there anybody there?
Yeah,
Question?
Murray Applegate's going over, and I think turn it on, Murray. You can answer the question.
I think you're live. There, microphone issues, whoa, very live. I just wanted to say, this semester I took a course, a Bennington College course through Zoom, taught by Judith Enck, the director of Beyond Plastics. The course was called Beyond Plastic Pollution, and I highly recommend it. I think she teaches it every semester. People from all over the country and a few international ones were in it. So if you have time, I totally recommend taking it. And the other thing I wanted to say is that one of our class assignments was to watch a documentary that's available online and that recently won a Grammy, like the day after we watched it, won a Grammy for documentary film called The Story of Plastics, that was produced by an organization called The Story of Stuff. And as we were saying, we all have plenty of stuff. So those are my recommendations to the whole group. Sigmund, did you have something you wanted to say?
I have a question. You're talking about food scraps. I would like to know if putting stuff down a garbage grinder so that it goes into the sewage system is an alternative if you don't have these other options.
That's
really
a great
bad.
question.
Tracy's had her hand up. Does that your response relate to that?
No,
Tracy?
let others respond. I had a question that I wanted to ask of this panelist, but yeah, let
Okay.
others speak about the garbage disposal issue.
Okay, briefly, it's not a good alternative, unfortunately, to use the garbage disposal, because with your municipal wastewater treatment facilities, it's increasing the biological oxygen demand on the system, and it's not really an alternative to landfilling. Composting, whether it's in your own backyard or through a service, or eventually, hopefully, curbside municipal food scraps will be a thing, is really the way to go. And while we're talking about award-winning and monumental documentaries, Kiss the Ground is something that's available on Netflix and other places, as far as I'm aware still. Narrated by Woody Harrelson, has a lot of stars in it, but also a lot of regular people, and it just really fundamentally awakens people to the food scraps composting need, among other things. Just basically the soil's ability to help solve the climate change crisis by drawing down carbon, and the fact that compost in the soil just makes the roots of the plants that much, the living soil that much more able to combat climate change. And then the other thing about that is that methane, if you landfill food scraps, it produces methane, which is approximately 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide, a greenhouse gas, versus if you're composting food scraps, it's making them part of the short-term carbon cycle. So rather than producing that methane.
Are there any more questions from the community hall?
My question was about paper in the recycle bin. It seems like it would get contaminated when you're putting it in. I live in Albany, so does it make sense to put the paper in with everything else?
Yeah. Honestly, you're right. Paper, if we're talking about office paper, printer paper, that is very likely to get contaminated in the back of a recycling truck. Cardboard, paperboard, stuff like that has a better chance of coming through on the back end through the MRF in good condition. I personally save all my paper and bring it to the free shredding events that we have in Albany. There's 2 every year. There's one in the spring, one in the fall. I have to look at the back of those recycling trucks almost every day, and I can see the condition of the paper back there. It's not great. So I would suggest, if you can, to save up your paper scraps. I even save up, like if I buy a shirt or something, the paper tag that comes with it, I'll save that up and throw it in the shredder too.
Okay.
So any little pieces of paper that happen to, Post-its, whatever, I save all that up until the paper shredding event and then just bring it to that.
Like newspaper?
Newspaper, yeah, I mean, you can bring that to the shredding event too. I kind of, not to say that I draw the line, but I usually don't collect newspaper because it like really builds up.
Yeah.
Magazines I'll save. I don't really read the newspaper, so I guess maybe that's more of a response. But if you do have newspaper, you can save it up for the paper shredding events. But typically speaking, I just put my cardboard and my paperboard. So like a box for cookies, a box that cookies came in, I'll throw that in the recycling bin. But individual pieces of paper, I try to save up for the shredding events because I know it's all going to get shredded together and it has a better chance of, being reused, being sold. So.
In Bethlehem, you can take them over to the transfer station. I save about 6 months of paper and then I take it over because the contamination issue.
Yeah.
I save up the paper and take a trip over there. It's kind of interesting to go to the landfill anyway, or the transfer station. It's only $2 to put the recycling in the bin. So
Yeah, we have kept our transfer station as a dual stream facility, so it's source separated rather than all being single stream. But I know Tracy wants to talk.
okay, Tracy.
Yeah, so it's really great to be on the panel with both of you and see that you're thinking about a lot of different things. Single stream was an invention of the waste industry. Single stream was not put into place because it would improve the effectiveness of recycling. It was promoted as more people will recycle because it's easier. It might have been a little bit more convenient, but it resulted in massive amounts of contamination, about 25% contamination in numerous studies of single stream. It makes it harder to recycle because basically the one principle in recycling for everything is you need purity. You can't recycle mixed waste. It's too contaminated. So some communities are finding that actually the cost of dual stream recycling, that's when you have the paper and the cardboard in one bin or 1 week and the containers in another bin or another week, is much cheaper. And some communities, say, for example, in New Jersey, have decided to go to dual stream. Some municipalities are actually putting in small MRFs of their own, small MRFs that do a much better job. They can market their own materials. There's transparency into what happens with the recyclables. So I think this is the wave of the future. I think we're going to be, moving away from single stream because it's such a disaster. And if you look at how much residue, how much stuff goes to a landfill or incinerator from a MRF, a single stream MRF, it's a whole lot. So, and that's part of the cost. They have to get rid of the stuff that's not recyclable. But I really wanted to ask Sunny and Dan what their thoughts are about the two innovations that I've suggested. One, deconstruction, and two, a center for hard to recycle materials or a resource recovery park where people could bring all their hard to recycle materials, like a transfer station, but having a lot more things that people can get rid of there.
Oh, boy.
And this may be a longer discussion, but I'd love to talk to you further because I think the region is ripe for both of these things.
Yeah. Okay.
Dan, do you want to start or?
Sure. Both of those would be amazing, Tracy. And would like to move in that direction. As far as deconstruction, one of the things that I know that the city of Troy is starting very slowly to move towards is having different permits for demolition versus deconstruction, and having a lot higher fee for demolition, rather than if you're going to deconstruct a building or a house and save all those materials. Amazing difference for the planet and our society. So one way of short of requiring deconstruction instead of allowing demolition, which would be a much longer path, one thing that the city of Albany and or town of Bethlehem or other municipalities can work towards is at least making it a lot more expensive if you're going to trash all of those materials versus deconstruction. There also, you can make incentives for deconstruction, and one of those would be to have a local reuse store like they have out in Tompkins County and other places. We have the Habitat for Humanity restore in the city of Albany and Capital Region. But what I'm talking about is something much more comprehensive than just the mostly building materials, but every manner of consumer goods for reuse store. That's something that's on my goals list and I've been working towards. As far as the Center for Hard to Recycle Materials or a reuse park, that would be amazing as well. I know that Monroe County has a kind of gold standard reuse park. And Sunny had mentioned kind of the need for public-private partnerships and collaborations with nonprofits or potentially with private entities. And I think that's the only way that's going to happen. The Monroe County example, it is a partnership with a waste and recycling company. Unfortunately, the Albany County or other counties in the Capital Region don't have the leadership in waste and recycling issues that some of these other countywide efforts do. So it's harder. We're going to have to do our own collaborations with intermunicipal and public-private partnerships.
Sunny, did you have anything to add?
No, I agree. I would love to see both of those things. And I think now that the composting program is off the ground, I'm going to be looking into a lot more of this kind of stuff. Hopefully some deconstruction. The next project is textiles. We don't have a textile collection program. And then we're gonna hopefully do a big refuse single-use campaign next year. But yeah, I would love to see a convenience center, you know, where some of these harder to recycle things are brought. It's possible that there is space down at the DGS facility to maybe create a smaller scale version of something like that. Tracy, specifically what kind of products were you, I mean, I kind of know the answer, but which ones were you?
Well, I think I listed a bunch of them. I mean, everything from plate glass and bubble wrap to
Right.
textiles, to books, to electronics, you know, some things that there is like a collection once a year where you can look around, but a lot of people are like, I got to get rid of it right now, and they just trash it.
Right.
You know, they might have a small living space. They might have people in their household that want to get rid of stuff. So, you know, I think it's just important. I'd love to work with both of you on kind of envisioning this. And I'll just mention that Zero Waste Warren County did 2 national webinars last year on starting a reuse facility and running it, you know, as economic development. And, you know, and with top people from around the country. We have recordings, and I could make those available to people.
Okay.
So you can, you know, you can see who you might want to contact to. And the city of Baltimore is going to be considering a deconstruction ordinance in the coming year. They have a sponsor. The bill is pretty much written, and you know, it might be a model to consider. I think often these start out with incentivizing deconstruction, you know, having a bigger fee if you're just demolishing, or having a bond for builders that don't show that they've recycled a certain amount of their waste materials.
If you could read, you three could read the questions in the chat, and if you have time and put in some answers there. I did want to add to repair things before you give them away, try to do repairs. That's the Repair Cafe is wonderful. I visited that a couple of times, and they fixed some things that I had for quite some time. And they like, I can use them again. It's like, wow, or give them away and they're still useful to somebody. So
Okay, Carol,
Carol, we have
there's a-
somebody a couple of people here in Community Hall that would like to ask a question.
okay, Chuck, do we have time?
oh, I guess, yeah.
Okay.
I think what we can do is we can allow people to leave if they want to leave, but if they want to hang around for a few more questions, we can probably do that.
Okay, great.
Is this, okay. These might be more comments than questions, but as a mom, it's hard for me sometimes to do the reducing, to do the recycling. I try. I currently have a little worm bin going for food waste at home. And for the reducing, I've been trying to use Misfits Market to buy more produce. It's a shipping thing, but I like their packaging because it's all cardboard, it's all low waste, and the cardboard goes in the worm bin too. I do thread up to buy recycled clothing, to buy used clothing, not as a cost thing, but just as a lower waste thing. But I don't always know how to evaluate the effectiveness of these businesses because I don't always trust businesses to be honest about their real impact. And so I don't know what resources there are out there to evaluate these businesses or ways to help parents who are struggling with time management just to get the basics accomplished, much less to provide a better future for their kids. I don't want to sacrifice my kids' future for the short-term convenience right now. And so my question is kind of what resources are there out there? But before I actually ask that question, the other thought I want to put out there is I've often thought about the what I think of as that landfilling myth, where we toss it away, we forget it, it ceases to exist, which is not true. And so I'm wondering if there's educational opportunities for youth or kids to come toward these facilities to see what actually happens to recycling. Where does it go? What can be recycled? What can't be recycled? Because we often just throw things in the recycling bin thinking, okay, it'll be recycled. And that's, I know that's not true. We in this room know it's not true, but not everybody out there knows that's not true. So those are my comments, questions. Thank you.
Could I respond to that briefly? That the recyclerightny.org, I put in the chat, but is a great resource for the speaker as well as the woman who made that question, but also anybody else to get started. It's got a recyclopedia on there, which you can ask, is this recyclable? And even though, as we said, in New York, different municipalities have different rules, I have found that their answers are really spot on for the communities in the capital region that I'm aware of. And they also have links to all of the local municipal websites as well. So recyclerightny.org is a great resource to get started.
So someone is asking about discarded COVID masks and paper diapers, or probably plastic diapers would be the more correct term. There's a lot of things that just are not recyclable. And, we just have to recognize that. So anything that you could do to reuse would be superior. And I know that's not always possible, but I think that generally we can do a better job. And there are diaper services. Yeah. I would also, to the woman who was talking about buying produce mail order, I would really encourage buying locally because, I think it's going to use less resources if that is a possibility.
There was some question about the Repair Cafe. Before the COVID, these guys were mostly guys it was, setting up these places. They would announce on the website, Repair Cafe, a time and a place where they would be, and you could bring anything to them and they would try to fix it for you. They were fantastic. And I think it probably has been discontinued since COVID. Hopefully it will be.
They're starting up again in some places, I've heard.
Yeah, in the spring they're starting up again. I put some information in the chat about that.
Great.
There's a great book called Repair Revolution that was written by two of the key people in the Repair Cafe movement, which actually has its roots in the Hudson Valley, I believe.
Great, thank you. Chuck, do we try to continue or what do you think?
I think we should wrap it up. One quick question Chris Bystroff had on books. I know in the Bethlehem, there's a receptacle at the Bethlehem Library, which is often full, but if you get there at the right time, you can find, and you can put books in it. Are those, what happens with those books, Dan? Do you know, and is that a reasonable thing?
Yeah, in general, paperback books are recyclable. You can put them in your curbside bin. You can bring them to a transfer station. Hardcover books are not usually accepted because of the cover. You can remove the cover if you're talking about recycling for reuse. Chuck just mentioned a place at the library. There are various receptacles like that for organizations that try to reuse them, but it's always full and it's kind of a nebulous intent anyway for those books. But we have twice annual collection events, spring and fall, that are open to anyone in the region. Grassroots Givers is one local organization that will take books. They can't take every book. There's a place called Corner Gateway in Slingerlands that will take a lot of books for, they sell them $1 a piece. They take them for free. Reuse more for the hardcover. Reuse is always better than recycling anyway, but you really can't recycle the hardcover unless you're removing the cover, is what they tell us. So
some people have this little thing out front of their houses that they put
libraries,
and people can take or give books to that.
Yeah, the little micro free library or tiny free library or whatever it's called is an amazing movement. So yeah, support those.
Okay, I think that's good, Carol. I think we should wrap it up.
Okay, thank you so much, you guys. This has been so productive. We could go on and on and on, I'm sure. And so I hope all of you who participate have learned something that's going to be very useful to you. And thank you so much for everybody who's participated. Sonny, you had something.
I put in the chat the website that tracks legislation, recycling policy, and it's called Tracking the Future of Recycling Policy in Congress. So I would suggest following those things and supporting them however that's done. But just being aware of them is probably a good thing.
And I'll just mention that the Zero Waste Capital District group has a public policy committee. It was just formed earlier this year, but it's been very active. I joined it even though I'm not in Albany because there's some good potential there. So think about joining Zero Waste Capital District. You can get on their listserv and find out what's going on.
I had one last thing to say. I would just you can put pressure on me. If there are things that you feel like we need to be doing, send me an email. I am here, I'm a public servant, so I'm here to make recycling work for you and to help you become zero waste. So if you have suggestions, if you have questions, feel free to email me and then I'll bring them up the chain. I'm not afraid to do that. So any suggestions or things you would like to see, send them my way.
Keep in mind that every effort that you make personally is going to help the climate crisis. So all these issues are related to the climate. Maybe in the spring we can have another one of these. Looks like we still got a lot to discuss and a lot of things to learn from this. So maybe we can talk about having one in another 6 months. So thank you, speakers. Thank you.
Thank you for including us, and
All the people on the committee.
Before you erase all of the chats, because those of us in the community hall haven't been able to see them or keep them, so if you
You're
can,
saving it.
thank you.
Thank you, everyone. That was awesome.
Yes, thanks for everybody's questions and answers, and
Thank you, Sunny,
yes,
very much for
thank
coming
you to
on.
all of us. Yes, we're so glad we could finally get you.
Yeah. I feel like I scored a coup getting Sunny.
You got it. You got it. All of you guys were terrific. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
you take
Okay.
care. I hope everyone has wonderful and zero waste holidays.
Yes,
Yeah.
unconsumptive holidays. Have
I'm
a-
giving my grandchildren to charity. They're going to contribute to charities. So
Oh,
Ciao.
yeah.